gets a lot of sea return, probably around between 8 and 9 miles, and when he got in the sea return, we turned the other radar on, and we really wasn't sure of any definite target after that.
Darrell, I think it's important to say that we're not trying to tell you what to think regarding the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. We're just presenting information, but based on your research, the research that you keep digging up, you keep coming up with new information. And I don't want to say that this is new information for everybody in the know, but it's certainly new information for me. The hatch covers, you told us last year, they couldn't be fastened completely 100%. And wouldn't you know it, a deckhand comments this year and says, that's exactly right. I worked on it in 74. You couldn't clamp everything down the hatches.
By the way, he responded.
Did he?
Yes, because I had asked him, were you on before or after she went into dry dock in 74 in the spring?
Yes.
He said after. So that means after the dry dock inspection, when they could have done all this work, you still couldn't shut the hatches right.
There you go. Well, that's something you came up with last year and essentially confirmed this year by the comment from Don Evans.
Yep.
Now, and the other thing was that I didn't know about was the spare prop blades on the deck, which we can visibly see now in pictures, but I never knew about that. I know you've got even more new information, at least to me. Yeah. And I'm looking forward to hearing about it. Are we on the subject of radars? Is that where you're going to start? Or where?
I will be there. I'm not going to start there. I'd like to start at the beginning. At the beginning.
Wow, that's 1957 for the Fitz.
Picture, if you will. Yes, you're absolutely correct. What I did, I've studied the launch of that boat so many times, it took forever on a computer to find this out, but I wanted to know what the water datum was on that date. Okay, and there's ways of doing that. It ain't easy going back to 1958, but the day on that date, it was 570.92 feet. That's above sea level, okay? Now, you and I both know, back in our days on the Maumee River, that the water gauge, the water would come up and the water would go down. There's some days you could go behind Grassy Island up by Perrysburg, and there's days when it was lower, you couldn't.
Depends on which way the wind's blowing.
That is exactly correct, because the Maumee River is not a river, it's an estuary, meaning there's not enough water coming down from Fort Wayne, Indiana to make that river. Water goes in from Lake Erie and it comes back out. That's an estuary, okay? Now, there'd be days we'd have plus 60. That's 5 feet. So if the chart said you had 3 feet of water, but you had 60, that's 5 feet. You got 8 feet. The Queen drew 6 feet. So you could go behind Grassy Island. That's what I wanted to know here. From the day they laid the keel in there and started building it, and let us not forget, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the Great Lakes Engineering Works was built on an old swamp. It was built on a swamp. What does a swamp mean? They drained the water, but it's still mushy and you know what I'm saying? And as long as they built boats that weren't that big, I don't think they had that many problems. But you get the biggest, the longest, the heaviest boat going. And, nowadays they got laser beams. They can see it's perfectly straight. But back in them days, that looks good, or put that 4 foot level down. We'll go the next, that's nice and level.
Well, does that mean to say they laid the keel on unstable ground?
That's precisely what I'm saying. And I'm also saying this, that if you watch that launch, if they would have extended those wooden, I don't know what, they look like railroad ties, but they're not, she could have slipped into the water. But when they launched, and of course she didn't want to go in the water to start with. Remember, everybody said it looked like she didn't want to go.
And it looked like when she was there, wanted to jump back out.
But if you watch it, and I watched it over and over, even in slow motion, there is a point in time when that boat literally is like an airplane, 3 feet out of the water. And when she hit that water, I say to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, that is when things started to go bad, because they had tack welds and stuff, you know what I'm saying, that they found later. And if you watch it, she goes over there and creates this tidal wave and floods everybody out, right? But the bow, it doesn't hit flush. It hits the bow, bam, like that. Longest boat ever built to that time. That is when things started going bad right there.
Yeah, biggest boat to ever go in the waters in North America at that time.
And you watch that over and over and over again, and you let's put it this way. Here's a good analogy. Take a bowling ball and go 2 inches over your foot and drop it on your foot. Ow, that's gonna hurt. But you take that same bowling ball and drop it 3 feet up, you're going to the hospital. You're gonna have busted bones or something. You know what the dead weight of this was? With no cargo, where am I at here? 13,362 tons. That's what the Fitz weighed. And she's 3 feet, nothing supporting it. And she hit, and we all know, if you ever dive off a diving board and hit a belly smacker, how that hurts.
Oh, yeah.
Water's heavy, man. I've said that to somebody else. They say, yeah, but other ships go that way. Other ships have bulkheads, watertight bulkheads. The Fitz had none. Boom, that whole boat was, how many times have we heard somebody say the boat was like a diving board, it would just go over. So when she first was launched, the problem started right there. The new design, never built a boat like this before, but she didn't really cause problems until, in fact, they said she was a good handling boat, but until they rescinded all the load lines, that's when she started hitting the wall to Sault Ste. Marie. It was an unwieldy boat. It's like having a half-ton pickup truck and you got a camper behind you, you're fine, but next year you buy a camper twice as big. Well, now you got handling problems, it's the same thing, And going back to Red Bergner, who knows, he's feeding the crew, he's feeding the officers, and he hears all this stuff going on. He was absolutely right that keel was a problem from day one, man. How do you build a ship? And on the first day of launch, the bottom of the boat's here, but the keel's up here. So they had to shove all kind of shims down in there, is what they did. Bar stock and old welding rods and stuff, and then they tried to weld it up. From day one, she had problems there.
It wasn't right from the start.
No, they knew that then, but she made so much money for Columbia Transportation Company. She really did. And of course, it was a beautiful boat, and the newest, everyone was so proud of it. But they worked her to death, and when they rescinded them load lines, now you're just overloading the boat, So the ships get older and older and older, and I think a lot of deferred maintenance. There had to be. Mr. Evans said after she came out of dry dock, you still couldn't shut the hatches. Don't you think you had to fix the hatches when you're at dry dock? You ain't in dry dock one day. It takes, a week, 10 days to go through a whole inspection. I can remember my dad telling me back in the 40s, when he first got out of the service after World War II, 47, 48, Coast Guard would come aboard, they always make sure you had a case of scotch at the bottom of the ramp, or the bottom of the gate, or the ladder. Oh, you guys passed,
Yeah.
Off they go.
That's what I'm getting at.
I don't know if that's the way it is nowadays, but I can sure tell you there was some shenanigans going on over all those years,
Sure.
But
it's a different era.
By the way, the video that you can see that on, it's this is the freakiest thing of all. At the end of that video, that shows all the crowds. It's about, I don't know,
For the launch, you mean?
Yeah. And it says this video was made by a guy named R.J. Anderson. And how about the Mariners Church, founded by a woman by the name of Anderson.
The last name Anderson.
The freaky. You see, there's some weird hoodoo voodoo stuff here. In my opinion, maybe just me. Of course, I was born on Halloween, so everything's strange to me, All right. Anyway, I thought that was important to start with because you don't give a lot of thought to a lot of stuff until after things happen, But you brought up radars. Let's talk about this. What happened was she was sitting, and I'm not sure if it was now remember, the Fitz only went to Superior twice that whole year. I don't know which one it was at, but I can tell you this. When you're on a ship that you have to shift the boat, these big arms come down, right? You've seen pictures of that, and the taconite goes in the hole. Mm-hmm. Some of those docks can move themselves. And the deckhand, that's a beautiful job.
They can move the chute themselves.
Right. But some of them don't. And then you got to shift the boat. And that means the guy on the winches, and I hated the steam winches on the Joseph France, hated them. But electric winches, obviously that's why they improved. But you'd shift the boat back until you get it just right. And if the wind's blowing, then you got to go back a little bit more because the chute's got to hit just right. Otherwise, you're going to dump it all over the deck, see? Well, it come time to shift the boat, and the one chute was down, and they start shifting the boat back, but this thing didn't get up in time. Here's the radar mast, right? they're backing the boat up. They knocked it 45 degrees off of center.
The radar mast on top of the pilot house?
That's correct. That summer. Now,
Summer of 75.
It's kind of hard to read, but you can see the date on there and all the stuff they were doing. They were having nothing but trouble with that radar. 2 of them. In fact, I can tell you right now, for you folks at home keeping score, radar number 1 was a Sperry Mark III. Its range was from an eighth of a mile to 96 miles, 30 kW unit, according to my information. The other radar was a Sperry Mark VI, 24 to 72 nautical miles. But to lose both radars, they had so much trouble with the radar, that's why they went out. And they even had water getting in the radar scope in the pilot house. You know, and once again, you got waveguides and you got pipes and stuff coming down from the antenna down into the pilot house to the big radar set itself. I was on radar for 4 years in the Air Force, and let's put it this way: the radar was 30 kW. That's 30,000 watts. In the Air Force, ours was 6 million watts, 200-mile range. You know, big, powerful stuff, man. But if water was leaking in and getting into the radar scope itself, well, of course you ain't gonna have nothing there. That's why I think McSorley said, "Hey, I've lost both radars here. We need some navigational assistance."
Is there something to cables that go from the radar unit themselves and run the length of the ship back toward the stern? If that's true, the twisting and turning of the ship, could the cables have separated or broken?
Well, that's certainly possible. I would think that you'd have some kind of backup up forward. I know you did for the VHF radios and stuff after the Morale, because the Morale got screwed. When the ship broke in half, there was no more power at the front end. That was it. So they made it so they had backup for the radios. But now about the radar, that takes a lot of power to have radar. So that's a real possibility. Somebody could have snapped. But I tend to believe, because they had damaged it and they had been working on it that summer a couple different times.
Well, there were problems with the radar long before this trip.
You just try and put these pieces of the puzzle together, and getting the work order. I never knew that radar was knocked off at the loading dock.
I never knew they were working on the Edmund Fitzgerald radars that 75 season, because there was a problem. I mean, think how that could have changed the course of history if they would have had radar to work with. If they in fact did go aground in the shoal off Caribou Island, they could have directed themselves on a better course to not be where they ultimately maybe were.
Well, you can look at the ship on the bottom. You can see the radio direction finder antenna plain as day. It looks like an egg beater, like you'd have a mixer. You know, that's what kind of thing it looks like. Yes. Now, we've talked about the radar. Now we'll just kind of slide that over to the side for just a minute. It is deadly. I'm sorry, yeah, he's dead. I'm sorry. Dudley, from this book, folks, if you don't have a chance, get this book. I'm telling you, the night defense went down. He watched the Fitzgerald load.
Captain on the Wilfred Sykes.
On the Wilfred Sykes.
Dudley Paquette.
Which I think the Wilfred Sykes is in Toledo right now. Matter of fact.
Really?
I think so. We're working on things, folks. Trust me. Trust me. Stay tuned. But it was him that said, "This is getting too rough for me, boys. We're going to lay in behind Isle Royale," and which is what he did. But about that same time is when he overheard the conversation between Captain McSorley and Captain Cooper. He says, "Hey, my ship is working worse than I've ever seen. Ever. We got to check back." Now, I'm going to weave some things together here, so folks at home, take notes if you will. He says, "I've never seen it work this bad. I'm going to throttle back." Full tilt boogie was 99 RPM, right? And the Fitz did about, 16, 17 miles an hour. And the Anderson, if you watch it now on marine traffic, the Anderson's always going 12 and a half knots. I'm sure she could go faster, but she's an old boat, and they're checking her back a little bit, make her last longer, you know.
Mm-hmm. But and the seas weren't big, monstrous 25-footers in the evening, November 9, November 10, when they're off Isle Royale. The seas weren't even that big yet he's already saying the boat's working too hard.
Right. Now, the reason for that, I'm just going to go ahead and say this. We have information. I'm not going to go into where, how, why, or whatever. But the story we were hearing is that on her last unloading at River Rude, now you folks at home, you can get on
Zug Island.
At Zug Island. Remember the carnivals? You put the quarter in, you turn the and this big crank thing, go down, you try and grab a teddy bear or whatever, and it loose. That's the way they unloaded Absolute last run out of Zug
emptying
Island.
her out so they can go to Superior and get a full load.
And the story we're hearing is that there was the big thing that goes down and grabs him, and somehow either that screwed up and hit too hard, or when they put the clamps down like that.